So this is the Angel Investor Panel. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started on introductions here, I actually wanted to get a feel for the audience here. Assuming most are, let's raise hands if you're raising money for a company or entrepreneur. Now, keep them up though if it's a seed/angel stage, and that's what you're looking for. And okay, and then one last question: pre-revenue, the great pre-revenue label. Also a fair amount. Okay, great. So I wanted to set up this panel really kind of more as an opportunity for you to kind of have 4 or 5 Resi meetings in one. So not a whole lot of discussion amongst ourselves on angel investor topics, but more kind of questions that I'm sure you'd be most interested in. And we can kind of go down the list and you really get to hear from multiple different angel investors on topics that are hopefully of interest to you. And then also towards the end, happy to hand it over to the audience to specifically ask more questions that are directly of interest. So start off with some introductions. Myself, my name is David Light. I'm a member of the Landmark Angels, which meet primarily in Connecticut and New York City. My background is in molecular biology. Been an entrepreneur myself. I've been to multiple Resi conferences on the other end of the table, so I've seen both sides. And actually a company that I invested in is launching soon that I'm also very involved in the digital health space. I know that's another area that gets a lot more play these days than before, launching an analytical pharmacy. And yeah, that's about it for myself. I'm going to go down the line here and would obviously like to get a little bit about your background. Also, best way to get in touch. For me, I use LinkedIn a lot. It's actually a great way to exchange quick messages. And I mean, obviously trying to get people's cards is one thing, but for myself, LinkedIn is pretty good. So I'd like to ask the panel a little bit about your background, best way to get in touch. I'm sure everybody here is interested in that. And a little bit of why you're even interested in angel investing. So let's start it.
So my name is Steve Goodman. I am a co-founder of Mid-Atlantic BioAngels. We are somewhat unique because we only invest in therapeutics, diagnostics, and device companies. Our membership, about 60 people who are all experienced pharma people. So our internal discussions tend to be pretty robust. And when companies present to us, they get questioned at a pretty high level. What else did you ask?
Best way to get in touch.
Oh, best way to get in touch is through our website. I mean, bioangels.net, pretty simple. You can send us an email. The application form is actually on the website, so if you think you fit our investment parameters, you are welcome to send in an application. As far as why I got into this, I'm a lawyer by day, and 40 years ago took a small molecule company public and got hooked on the pharma industry. So I've been representing small and mid-size and some public biotechs since then. And that's my story.
Right.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Dick Ewells. I left the Harvard Medical School faculty because I was poor, started a group medical practice in Worcester, Massachusetts, got not so poor, then went to work for you as the senior medic in the Secretary of Defense's office, taking the health affairs budget through Congress, got poor again, went to work for George Soros, didn't get poor again. In the venture capital industry, we had about $3.2 billion at the time. We were playing with Pareto, Kleiner, and Sequoia coming on site. Then I retired to Florida to practice tennis, golf, and sex. One part of that is, by the way, a fantasy. And joined New World Angels, a 68-member professional money-losing group. We invest in a lot of things, but life science is really the center of what we do. Our typical deal is $750,000 to $1 million, although we've gone up to $7.5 million on our deals. We have a GUST website on which you apply. We look at about 20 companies a month. We pick 6 of those to present at our offices. We pick 3 of those companies to present to our membership at our monthly meetings. We form a due diligence team, and within a few months, either you have money or you don't have money, as the case may be. So we look forward to seeing many of you on our Gus site. You can reach me through that Gus site, New World Angels. And if you do that, but think of Christmas, think of Yule's, and throw my name on it when you apply as a reference from the RESI conference, and it'll get my attention right away because I'm chairman of the screening committee for all the new companies coming through. So we look forward to talking with many of you then.
So my name is Jennifer Renda, and I'm part of York Angels, which is based out of Toronto. And what we do, we've been a group, actually the largest in the province, about 120 members since 2008. We range in deal size and vary across industries as well, biotech and life science being one of them. Our group is really diverse in terms of their background and expertise, a lot of entrepreneurs, again, in different areas. And similarly, in terms of reaching our group, there is an online form that you can fill out. We do call screenings in advance. We have monthly meetings that, following those screenings and our onboarding committee vetting, get presented to the whole York Angels group. From there, you have an opportunity to engage with the investors. They generally invest as a syndicate and sometimes directly on their own. And there's a lot of collaboration with other angel groups that happen, so there's some deal sharing as well. So you get a lot of exposure within the network. From there, there's also mentorship opportunities that happen in collaboration with institutions to help with the process. So how I got here, I've been primarily engaged in the technology industry. Went through an exit a few years ago, started another organization, and run that company kind of on a daily basis. Was heads down for quite a while. Following that, decided what I wanted to do in conjunction with that, and started in the medical device space and sort of evolved into medtech and life sciences. And so my portfolio generally consists of investments in that space.
Hi, I'm Barbara Clark. I'm part of Astia Angels, which is a San Francisco-based angel group. We have a membership of people from across the United States and internationally. We're geographic agnostic in our investments. I'm also a member of a couple of funds. Some also based in San Francisco. Portfolia is the parent company of them, and as well as I'm on the investment committee for the Rising Tide Europe, which is obviously based in Europe, investing in European startups. I'm a generalist. I invest in a broad range of technologies. I think life science is probably about a third or so of my portfolio. I only invest personally in companies that have gender diverse founding teams. I'm an economist by background, big into Moneyball, those of you who like baseball and things like that. So I do some data-based analysis, and one is that gender diverse teams win. There's a whole bunch of other factors too so I Moneyball my investments. And my personal background is, as I said, I'm an economist, and for a long time I did intellectual property valuations of multinational companies. So thinking about intellectual property and what's generating value has been something that I, as a nerd, have found really interesting for decades, and so I apply that. And then even though my groups are based in San Francisco and elsewhere, I live here in Boston, and it took me 6 minutes to walk here. So I like coming to this conference because I can just walk, even when it's 90 degrees and I won't sweat.
It's the best way to get in touch, just to walk over.
Yeah.
And,
Oh yeah, that's right, getting in touch. Definitely LinkedIn. And Astia allows you to just apply online too, because again, we like to take bias out of a lot of application processes, so you can just apply, and you can use people's names if you want.
Great, thanks. So I know one of the things that comes up a lot these days is you really have very limited amount of time to get somebody's interest. Obviously, Resi is great, you can actually have a half an hour discussion with somebody, but schedules get busy. I'd like to hear from the panel the 2 or 3 main traits that you really look for, that actually catches your eye, that you're interested in when you're looking at a deal in kind of the life sciences in general. We'll start with Steve.
Okay. I think the first thing, well, obviously the technology is important, but as soon as you have a sense of what the technology is about, you want to think about what the market is and whether there's a real need for this product. Is it just a, sort of an incremental improvement on something that's already out there, or is it really going to change the way physicians or hospitals or healthcare systems conduct their business? That's, I think, really critical. There's also the stage of development. I've met a couple of companies this morning who I think have terrific science and preliminary stuff, but they're still essentially science projects. They haven't gotten yet to the point where they're investable. They're still sort of at the grant stage point of. They don't have enough data yet for an investor to make any kind of intelligent assessment of whether the technology is likely to prove out. And even though that's always a risk, it's a calculated risk, but you need some input in order to be able to make the calculations. So that's part of it. And then the third thing is the entrepreneur. Are they credentialed? Are they experienced? One of the problems with a paper application is obviously you don't get all the intangibles. And one of the advantages of a conference like this is you can actually meet the entrepreneur and make those sorts of evaluations. But ultimately, the entrepreneur is going to be key. I'm not going to trust you with my money unless I can shake your hand and look you in the eye and decide that you're both honest and competent. So I would say those are my benchmarks.
So, Counselor, let me sum up what you've said. You show me a humble guy and I'll show you a loser. Think a 10, be a 10. We at New World Angels bet on the entrepreneur. Case closed. The MIT studies have shown it, the Harvard studies have shown it, the University of Minnesota studies have shown it. You are betting on the entrepreneur. And those of you who haven't read Make Your Bed, Adam McRaven's book, should do it. Think a 10, be a 10. Think a winner, be a winner. If you know you're going to succeed, you may succeed. If you don't think you're going to succeed, you're never going to succeed. So entrepreneur is number 1. Concept is number 2. And I don't know how to pick a good concept. If you want to really do well in the stock market, short what I buy. But if you are a good entrepreneur and you really are focused and you want to make that company a winner, almost no matter the concept, we'll invest in you.
Well, I echo a lot of these sentiments clearly, and my number 1 also is the entrepreneur and the team, because that's what makes a great idea actually happen. And so that would be my first. So second, obviously the concept, the scalability is really important as well. But really, one of the first things I look at is that rapport and that, look in the eye, shake the hand kind of thing, because that's key and utmost of importance as you move along through the process, because there's going to be a lot of decisions that need to be made. There's going to be room for coachability and mentorship and leveraging on networks for advice and expertise in certain areas. And so having a team that is driven, wants to win, wants to succeed, notices what their downfalls are, reaches out for help in those areas, is collaborative, and I think that's the most important thing. And once that happens, I think you move on to the other elements that are important for a deal.
Yeah, we invested in a great team, and I want to be sort of wowed by the team, like, wow, how did they get that person? Because that's a signal that, they have the confidence to recruit a really great team. They're going to have confidence when they have to get sales and investment and stuff like that. I also really, it's a big signal if there is someone who's a subject matter expert and an investor who's really excited about what you're doing. I think that that's really important. And the other thing we haven't talked about is capital efficiency, because I want to make sure that what your strategy is maps with what as an angel, what I'm expecting. So we don't really talk a lot about how, big venture can do really shitty things to angels. So I may not be excited if you're saying that you're going to end up needing to raise 100 million or something like that. So I'm looking for companies that are capital efficient.
Let me just say, I agree with everything they said. I may have misheard the question. I thought the question was, how do I get your attention? Not, how do I decide to invest? So,
But yeah,
I'm looking at, you look at the company on paper, it's
the
impossible to evaluate the entrepreneur, right?
But that if you look on paper and you see well, this is who they have for the team, that's interesting, right?
I agree.
And then the second piece too is also to even take the call, it's gonna have to be capital efficient. Some idea,
Great. So another thing that maybe doesn't get asked so much, but I think is very important feedback for entrepreneurs to get from people that look at deals all the time, it's hard to get a yes in general. I mean, just numbers wise, most times it's going to be an or a no. And I think useful for entrepreneurs to hear what are very obvious no's. Like things that you see and you're like, oh, yeah, see, you just turn off and you move on. And I think there's a number of those. And one of the things that I'd like to say from my own experience, to jump ahead here, is things that are kind of, nobody else is doing this, or that there's, the pharma totally ignored this and then we are solving this whole thing. Even if at some level it's true, like if everybody's totally ignored it and you're the only one in this giant space that's actually doing it, that's kind of almost an immediate turnoff. Like there's almost always somebody that's doing something similar or in the general space. And it's good to see the connection of how you can actually work in this whole market as opposed to the lone crusader against everything else, is my little tidbit. But let's start with Barbara. Another side.
Contrary to maybe what Silicon Valley thinks is jerks and liars are really a no-go for me. I know that they could do well in Silicon Valley, but I'm like...
Did you say drunks?
Jerks. Drunks, I don't know about that. But jerks and liars, it's like if I really... Like this whole cult of people thinking you have to be this awful person. I'm not into that.
Awful people.
Awful jerks and liars.
Yeah. Jerks and liars, probably that thing. I really echo the sentiment about not understanding or recognizing or admitting to the competitive landscape. It is what it is. I mean, obviously it shows that there's interest in this space, and I think disclosing that's really important, or being able to talk about that. The second thing is sort of an arrogance, and building on your point of that. I mean, we all have areas in which we can use our resources for the betterment of what we're achieving, but not kind of realizing that and being humble about the opportunity and true to that. That arrogance, and it just turns you off right away if you don't get the good energy from the people you're meeting. That's sort of when I tune out.
So I think what the entrepreneur has to project to the investor is, number one, an ability to describe his company and where he wants to go in less than 25 words. Not my wife's 25 words, I mean 25 words. So that you have to stay laser focused in terms of your presentations, where you want your company to go, and how you're going to do it. And it's much more important to have that sort of elevator pitch concept honed, memorized, focused than anything else you do, in my view. Because your opening shot is going to set the stage for the perception of the investor about how they're thinking about you. And apropos to my previous comments, if I don't like you, you're not getting any money. If I love you, you got a shot at it.
Yeah, I think This is all true. I'm going to mention a couple of other things that are like small details, but like if we get an application and the management team consists of several members of the entrepreneur's family, probably not a good thing. High salaries, high burn rate, you know, those are turnoffs. We want, you know, it goes to Jennifer's point, and Barbara's, that you want to see that money is being carefully managed. Use of any kind of superlatives is usually a mistake. You know, don't say this is the best, this is the greatest. No one's ever thought of this before. You want to be factual. You know, you can exude confidence, but the way you exude confidence is by showing mastery of the field and anticipation of the kinds of questions an investor is likely to ask. You want to have a response. You know, it's like when people, you know, prepare for congressional hearings and stuff. They spend days being grilled in sort of fake situations, you know, or mock situations to try to anticipate what the questions are going to be. That's a worthwhile exercise because the more readily you can answer the question and be direct and substantive about it, the more you build the confidence in the investor that you're the person who can actually manage this project. And ultimately the goal is to find someone who's going to be able, if not take it through to the finish because maybe they don't have the full professional skill set, at least to understand their own limitations and at the same time move the project forward.
There's one other thing I wanted to add, Richard, to your point was, you know, having your pitch down pat. Another piece of that is understanding who you're speaking to and who that pitch is for. At least especially in the life science space, sometimes the investors you're speaking to may not be well versed in that area. So, you know, do your homework in advance and make sure what you're saying is actually resonating with the potential investor you're speaking to.
Oh, one other very important point which plays off this, which is it can't be a science presentation, right? You want to, a lot of times we get people who pitch, if they have a 15-minute pitch, they spend 10 to 12 minutes on the science and 3 minutes on the business. You got to flip that. You got to get the science into a form where anybody can understand it and then move on to how you're going to turn that science into an actual business. Because without a business, there's no return to the investors. So nobody's interested.
Yeah.
Great, you got a gizmo.
Yeah, I really underscore that. I think that's definitely a big problem in a lot of industries, where you're like educating us about the product or whatever it is, like what's the business first, and then because we can always dive deeper, but I don't know if I'm interested because I don't know what the business opportunity is. Yeah.
Right. And don't do all the science on PowerPoint slides. One of those other like immediate turnoffs probably for a lot of people is you see these PowerPoint slides that are just a bunch of text or a bunch of really complicated things. Nobody's going to read that. It doesn't help. You should be able to boil everything down into 2 or 3 bullet points and pretty picture is I think particularly useful. And by the way, another thing that a lot of the panel talking about honing your pitch and boiling everything down. What I've found on both sides of the table is that these events are great. So, I mean, obviously everybody's here. This is perfect for doing exactly that, get as many meetings as you can. But actually one downside of having half an hour with somebody is you can get really derailed. You can go into all these different details. There's lots of events in places like Boston, New York City, and all sorts of big cities that are like fast pitch events. It's basically an evening, a bunch of people get together and you talk for a minute or 3 minutes, and those are really good and cheap and like just for honing your pitch. Like you have to get it down into a minute, otherwise you're not going up there. So I'd recommend that kind of activity as well.
So can we take off on the point that everybody here has actually made? In terms of presentation, I had an opportunity to go up on the Hill many times, and I had 250 people working for me at the Pentagon, 2 of whom I had nothing else to do but to try to make me look smart at uphill data. And when I went up on the Hill, I never had more than 10 slides and never had more than 3 lines on a slide. These were sophisticated congressmen, 48% of whom were attorneys. Do the same thing for the investor. Make it doctor-proof. Keep it simple. That's biggest tip you can come away from here. When you see a busy slide that you can't assimilate in less than 60 seconds, you're in trouble. Nobody in this room can remember more than 3 facts when they walk out that door. The only thing you're going to remember is whether or not you thought this guy knew what he was talking about and whether or not you like him. That's the only thing they're going to remember. So the model for coming in and making a presentation is very simple. Straight, laser focused, something they can capture and love.
Think of this, first of all, you're not going to get a check off that pitch, right? You're going to get another meeting if you're lucky. And so think of it as a movie trailer, right? This is the highlights reel. This is the best jokes that you have. You want to get those across in like 10 minutes and hope that, as Dick says, that at the end of that meeting, the investor says, you know, that was a great presentation. Why don't you give me a call next week, right? We'll set up another meeting. So don't think of this as the hors d'oeuvre, you know, the way in which you prepare someone for the main event.
Yeah, and I think a downside of shows like Shark Tank is that everybody kind of has this feeling, especially the angel investors, like, oh, okay, these guys are just going to listen to me, like me, and then give me $100,000 in a duffel bag on the table. That may happen somewhat in Shark Tank, but I've never heard of it happening in the
I
other
think
than
in Shark Tank, most of those deals don't actually happen, so it doesn't even happen there.
Separate discussion, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's actually a good transition there into also the process. So I think we had a really good discussion about what is good, what isn't good, what appeals, what doesn't appeal. Next question that I'd like to ask the panel here is how long does it typically take? And I think that underscores this whole not real Shark Tank mentality of you have this first meeting, how long till you get a deposit, on average? And then maybe a little bit more about why. What is the actual process? And we'll start with Steve.
Okay. Short answer is from the time you file an application, it's 4 to 6 months. The application comes in, goes to our screening committee, which meets generally once a month, although if we get inundated, we'll meet more often. Usually about 25% of the applications we get invited to present. We send out a presenting company agreement along with the presentation invitation. We are somewhat unique in that we ask our applicants to give us a $30,000 warrant, which is priced at whatever the next round is. It's a way for us to be able, if the company is successful, to make some money down the road, because we don't have to put the money in now, we put it in later. If we don't put in $250,000, the warrant goes away after a year. But assuming that you sign that agreement and you come in to present, if we like you, oh, and by the way, if we turn you down, we'll tell you why. We won't just say thanks but no thanks. We'll give you at least a couple of reasons why we think the fit isn't there. If you come in and present and people like you, if they don't like you, we'll tell you why again. But if they do like you, somebody will step up as a lead investor. We also have 6 or 7 interns. There'll be an intern assigned to your company. That intern will then collect all the investors' questions. We'll convey those to the company. We'll take the company's responses and convey it back to investors. We'll arrange for conference calls if necessary. And generally, we try to bring that to a close within a month or 2 after the presentation. All of us are very sensitive to this death by due diligence process. So we really, and the members of our group, because of their experience in pharma, tend to be sensitive to the fact that this is high stakes for the entrepreneur, and people need to make decisions. So we try to get it done, and that's, as I say, 4 months if it's really propitious in terms of the timing. Otherwise, maybe as much as 6.
You have to figure on 6 months with New World Angels unless you have a term sheet already on the way. We publish our 9-stage process so that there is no secrets. From the time you present to our screening committee to the time the next week that you present to the entire group, until we form our due diligence team and run you through this 9-stage process. And before you have your money in the bank, it's going to be 6 months. And I think that's probably as succinct an answer as I can give. But for those of you who are interested in knowing the process, go to the New World Angels site. Everything is laid out there, pretty straightforward, and you can see exactly what we want and when we want it and how we're going to go about doing what we do. We use American Capital Association term sheet. It's 16 pages of nonsense. There's no secrets, but it's pretty transparent and it's pretty, I think, routine.
So at York Angels, you're looking at about a 3 to 6 month window from the time you apply online to when the funds are transferred. After the online process and the initial phone screening, assuming everything is pretty much meeting our criteria, you end up presenting at our monthly meeting. We get about 400 applications a year, and we call into our group about 15 to 20% of those. The highlight of that is if we feel that through that process you're not actually ready to present, but there's something tangible and there's an opportunity there that we want to explore, we work together with you to make sure you actually come to our meetings as a guest, see really what to expect, what are the kinds of things that the investors are asking following the meeting, what types of things need to be aligned in terms of your presentation, and so you can better prepare and do that for the following month. And so we help to at least make you ready for an opportunity the next time around. Yeah, so that's...
So I'm going to answer this a little differently. I think as an entrepreneur, the best investment of time that you can make is to identify a subject matter expert who's an experienced investor who loves you and thinks you're great. Because that could take a year or more, and that's why you should be talking really early, maybe well before you're thinking of raising, because they'll guide you in what investors are looking for in your sector, and their credibility will open the door to other investors. So, because that will shorten when you have that particular lead, and then if that person's part of a group particularly, then once you have that, then they're putting themselves out there, talking to other angel groups. We share diligence, so it will make it all go quicker. And then, I've also been part of things where my group decided to invest in a company, and for me, it wasn't de-risked enough for my personal taste. So, I went in 2 years later in the later round, which was fine. So sometimes, a no isn't a no, it's just a not right now. Our group tries to, when there's a lot of stuff, all those things have lined up where maybe there's a really strong lead, we'll try to do it within like the month or 6 weeks, because we know that all the materials are there that we can leverage. So there's no investment. I think it's the best investment of your time to really find those evangelists, and you find a couple of them who have the credibility.
Yeah, I actually want to echo that too. In my experience, I've definitely seen that happen often. And in terms of, you might have a number of different investors, but if you can pinpoint one that's going to be really beneficial to you, can really evangelize the company, brings a lot of credibility, it turns into a crowd effect, and your whole round can go that much faster, and subsequent rounds and everything else. So it's not always easy to find exactly who that person is, and to actually get inroads there and all that. But
it can also tell you something about
cheap.
your company if you can't get somebody like that interested,
Fair enough.
Because I'm going to ask them, I'm going to go to my subject matter experts and say, what do you think of this company?
Right. So we've discussed a lot about the initial discussions, how to interest everybody, the process, and I want to, kind of the last question, then opening it up to the audience of the process is, okay, let's now assume that you've actually gotten some money from an angel investor. What to expect there from the standpoint of how involved is your group or yourself personally? What are you kind of expecting to be able to do with the founders or not be able to do? And I know there's quite a variety of how investors deal with the companies that they've already invested in. So it'd be great to just get your take on how you're actually planning to interact, or would like to best interact with a company that you already invest in. And we'll start with Barbara.
I mean, I think everyone's, the answer is it varies. So, depending on how involved I am with what they're doing in particular. However, for all kinds of companies, things like they might want to change lawyers or get a CFO, and so there's a lot of things that they need that we can help with. So we want to be involved. We want to know what's going on, like all the time, I guess. We want nice periodic updates. We want to, and this is also a differentiator with first-time entrepreneurs. They think that we only want to hear like everything's sunny and great, and the experienced ones know like they have to get ahead of like bad news and a pivot. The last thing I want to do is hear about a pivot or a problem in some quarterly update. Like, I want to know earlier, because we can help with things like that.
Yeah, I think if you're deciding to engage together, then you should be reaching out to your investors, especially if they're well-versed in the industry in which you're in. Always leverage their help, whether it be them personally or with their network and expertise. Being informed about what's happening, the last thing you want to do is find out from someone else, what's going on with the company, or read about it. That's actually quite terrible. And I like to offer my help and be as engaged as I possibly can. In good and bad situations, and being ahead of any difficulties or struggles makes things that much easier to firefight right away before it gets to become a bigger problem. But being involved is something you should look to your investors as an opportunity to leverage their expertise and their help.
So New World Angels, by their term sheet, takes a board seat with a preferred A initially, sometimes two. In cases where we're co-investing with another group that's putting in much more money, we'll take a seat where we can observe. But we want to be actively involved in watching what the company's doing and therefore helping what the company is doing. By our regulations, no member helping the company can be paid for his services, including the board member. But we have found among our 68 members that invariably we have somebody with, if not expertise in the area, connections with people who have expertise in this area. We want to make that company a winner. And we know that that director almost invariably will be knocked out by the VC coming in with big money on the next rounds. So we want to put him in a position so that he can set everything up to make that happen. We want to see that company super successful. We want to see a tenfold return on our money, and of course we get it every time.
Yeah, I think we make it very clear to the companies. Let me say this, about half and half of our investments are we lead. And if we're lead, then we usually will get at least a board observer seat, if not a board seat. If we're not lead, then our basic message to the company is, we're here to help you, we want you to succeed, and we have a lot of both expertise within the group and connections that can be helpful. So they should be free to contact us. We also have, on the restricted part of our website, places where the companies can post newsletters or reports or updates, whatever it is, and we encourage them to do that. Again, for the same reasons that Barbara mentioned, we don't want to be surprised if there's a problem. Tell us there's a problem, tell us how you're going to deal with the problem. We're not helicopter investors, we're not hovering over the company. We gave the entrepreneur the money because we expect the entrepreneur to do all that work. But part of that is understanding what assets the entrepreneur has, and that includes reaching out to us in a suitable situation.
Yeah, I would just say also to really think of an investor pool as also as an advisory pool. I mean, obviously, they have done evaluations on you, they've done evaluations on probably your whole space and other companies. And at the very least, leveraging the knowledge base people that have invested in you, I think is really powerful. So at that, we have another about 9 minutes or so, and also want to leave the time before the end of the hour if people want to talk to the panelists. So open up to the audience. Questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How do you handle exits? Is it managed or just happens?
Yes.
All of the above?
That's a complicated question, and the lawyer's going to have a really great answer for you. We want to,
We're just people.
you know,
Not really.
if you look at the universe of angel investing, for example, University of New Hampshire studies from their business school, which I'm sure many of you have reviewed, but over the past decade or so, they've looked at, last year there was like $26 billion invested on the angel side, forget the venture capital, with 64,000 odd companies. The mean was about 350,000 investments. Pre-money was 2.5 to 2.7. It gives you sort of a standard. 1/3 of these companies go belly up, 1/3 of them are M&A, 1/3 of them sit there and fester. There's no such thing as an IPO in the real world. Yeah, there were 120 nationally last year, but out of 64,000 companies, that's just not a huge number. So the exit strategy, almost always, if it's successful, is going to be an M&A. Or we're going to find some way of bringing in a secondary group that will buy out the whole operation. A classic example for New World Angels, which has just been published, was we invested in a company called Leotar Bioscientific, a pharma company. It only took us 9 years to get out of it. I'm being facetious here, folks. That's a long time for angel investment. But we came out with a multiple because NANT, a Chinese company, rather controversial Chinese company at that, bought us up, and we came out with a 9-fold multiple in 9 years, which we thought was acceptable, and almost wiped out our losses on the 100 other odd companies that we had. So I'm being facetious. You don't take any of this too seriously, but the 9-fold number is pretty good. So that's a classic example of how the average angel is going to escape from his investment and how he's going to make you successful as an entrepreneur. It's almost always going to be an M&A of some sort.
I would say, I want to add, I'm part of a European fund, and they are much more focused on exits than we are in the United States. I think we have it there, but they're very, very focused on making it happen in a certain timeline, which is interesting. I'll see how it really unfolds, but it's been very interesting, that mindset for them.
Yeah.
So when a company gets through due diligence with you, I'm curious about your approach with terms and valuation. So if I'm coming in, I've got an idea of valuation range and what terms I'm looking for, if I'm planning on lead with that. How do you approach that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if you're interested in a company, how do you go about figuring out terms?
You talk about a pre-money valuation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is, to the extent that there are comparable opportunities or there have been announced deals, you look at those to see what your expectations can be if you hit all your milestones and you had a successful exit. Then you look at the current state of the art as it stands today. Is this company significantly differentiated? I mean, valuation is not a science, particularly pre-revenue. I mean, it's a lot of seat of the pants guesswork. So the answer is, it's fair market value is what a willing buyer will pay to a willing seller. I don't think there's an easy answer.
And so then what about terms as far as, participation, things like that? Do you have a standard that you go by?
Again.
So voting rights,
There's a lot of standard stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you can look at,
Like-
there's Series Seed stuff online, there's all kinds of opportunities.
There's a lot of vanilla.
Take a look at the ACA, look at the
Yeah.
Capital Association term sheet. It's typical, and I haven't talked to any of these folks before, but it's typical of what almost all of us use, give or take.
Thank
Yeah. And I think I would add to all that, like, the worst thing you can do is just being unrealistic, like coming and saying, I got the best idea ever, I want $50 million pre-money value. Like, it's going to be one of those obvious turnoffs. But also don't stress about it too much. It's not a science. Like, if your peers are at like a $5 million pre-money and you're going to try and push for 6, go for it. You know, don't stress out about that. But just try and be realistic. Try to be in line. Don't create new structures of any kind. And I think that you'll be okay.
Well, there's a good reason not to have too high a pre-money valuation. And the best reason I can think of, having sat on the venture capital side of the house for most of my career, is that it will keep a venture capital group from coming in unless you're willing to take a cram down on the valuation. So you want to make sure that you've set yourself up so that you can bring the big money in and really take this company to the next level. And to do that, you need to keep your valuation reasonable, whatever that means.
So valuation workshop in this room in 15 minutes, if anyone wants to say that.
Good
Yeah,
plug.
I'll just say, you know, as someone who did IP valuation for a really long time, the way we do it in this industry is just an abomination. So, yeah, I mean, it's not tied to like how you would do it in like other private equity. It's totally not, because there's no data.
David, you mentioned about getting in touch with LinkedIn. What do you want to see in that LinkedIn message?
So I think a couple of us mentioned that, but I would say the same concepts. Like, don't write an entire essay in there. Like, I don't think anybody would read that. But have a link. Like, if you have a video of something that's really short, maybe link to that, and a sentence or two that's going to really grab somebody's attention is just a useful thing to have. Right? You can shotgun that approach. Get a whole list of people that are interested or are in that area. And it can be a pretty effective tool, at least from my perspective.
Nothing beats, like, you actually have to do the work. Like, what have they invested in? Like, make some comment about that, like, see the similarities, so you can say, I'd be interested, saw you invested in such and such, I'd be interested, blah, blah, blah. Like, just do the work, because you can read, like, you can tell something's just a spam mass email.
Yeah, I think it cuts both ways. I mean, when I set up meetings for today, I'm looking at the stuff that you guys have posted on the site. I'm at least giving it a preliminary read to see if it generally fits what we're interested in. And, if I have questions, I've got several of the companies I met with today where I had an exchange. You have talking about your IP. What does your IP cover? That sort of thing. I do research before I have a meeting. And I think it's the same burden is on you. If you want to have a productive meeting with an angel or a productive correspondence with an angel, you have to show that you've actually dug into, what they've been doing. None of us are, so low profile that you can't find out what we've been doing. So, somehow work that into why you're contacting us. I saw that you invested in such and such. Right. Well, my company is in a similar space, and we're at a similar stage of development, or something like that. Makes it much more compelling than just saying, "Hi, I've got a new thing."
So I'll just comment on that real quick. I actually did my own little study on this when actually looking for other people to fund various projects. And I think how was doing both is really the best approach. Like, for a few of the key investors we talked about before, there's key investors that can be really powerful for you. Be very careful about those. Really do your research. Really try to appeal to them. Try and accidentally bump into them at some place or another. All of that is not so an accident, or the little bit of research that I did is when looking in conferences and reaching out to people. The difference in the response rate of a researched outreach versus non was in the noise. And like, you basically got the same amount of responses, same number of meetings, whether you had kind of the cookie cutter approach or whether it was a super researched approach. I don't know if it was a completely statistically significant study, but it was like 100 or so in there. So anyway, do both. I think there's a lot of value in both, in my personal opinion.
And reach out. I think that's really important. Reach out. It may not be that angel investors invest, but it's good to have that collaboration and have that person or a group of people who follow you along your evolution of growth as well. So maybe they're not interested now. It could have been like like Barbara's point about being interested in another round, or maybe it's not the right time. But keeping people within your network and keeping them updated on your story is important too.
So it's actually right at the end of our time here, a minute past, and want to make sure that there is that 10
One more
minutes.
question.
All right, real quick.
Yeah, what is the impact of grants on your assessment? Dick, you will say zero, I assume, but I would like to hear what is the impact of previous grant support by NIH on your assessment of a company?
Oh, non-dilutive funding is fabulous. Like, it's a proof, it's, hey, free money?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely a plus.
Yeah, the validation is good. It's not going to solve everything, but it's certainly on the plus side of the ledger.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Feel free to